Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video we are going to learn about clause and its all part and how to denote itself. I think that video will clear your all doubts regarding clause chapter. So if you watch the full video till the end, I hope that will not disappoint you. And one more thing, if you are new in my channel, then don't forget to subscribe this channel for get notified when I post a new video. So without any further delay, let's move on to the main video. So first of all, you need to know what is clause. A clause is a group of words and a part of a sentence with a finite verb in it. It is divided into two parts or two types, such as principal clause and subordinate clause. So clause is divided into two types, that is principal clause and subordinate clause. And subordinate clause also three types. Number one, that is noun clause, adjective clause and adverb clause. Remember this chart. So what is principal clause? Principal clause is the one that itself is complete in sense. Remember that principal clause completes a sense of a sentence, while subordinate clause is the one part that depends on the principal clause to add some additional information. Remember, subordinate clause is the one that depends on the principal clause to add some additional information. Hence, the subordinate clause is also known as dependent clause. Let's see the following example to understand better. I know that you are a good boy. I know that you are a good boy. In the sentence, that you are a good boy, that is subordinate clause. That is subordinate clause. And I know, that is principal clause. So in the following example, I know that has personal meaning too in I know. But that you are a good boy, that's not carrying a meaning. So for this, that you are a good boy, that is subordinate clause, and I know with meaning, that is called principal clause. Point to be noted, there may be more than one principal clause in a sentence, and in such cases the first principal clause is called principal clause and the other principal clause called as coordinate principal clause. Let's see another example, that is, God loves us and so he does everything good to us, but we often cannot understand it. God loves us, so he does everything good to us, but we often can't understand it. In the sentence, God loves us is the principal clause. After that, he does everything good to us is coordinate principal clause number one. Remember, he does everything good to us, it is a coordinate principal clause number one, and number two coordinate principal clause is we often cannot understand it. It is a coordinate principle number two. In the sentence, God loves us, it is a principal clause. He does everything good to us, it is coordinative principal clause number one. So is the coordinator. Remember, so is the coordinator in the sentence. We often cannot understand it. It is a coordinate principal clause, but is here also a coordinator. We can join the following sentences using and, but, or, neither, nor, and any other conjunctions to make a sense. Now let's talk about subordinate clause. The subordinate clause is a type of clause which relies on the main clause in order to form a full sentence. On its own, a subordinate clause cannot make a complex sentence. This type of clause has a verb and subject just like any other clause does. It is also known as a dependent clause. This type of clause is used to add more information to a sentence. For example, I meet my friend in London, where she grew up from a young age. I meet my friend in London, where she grew up from a young age. In the sentence, where she grew up from a young age, it is subordinate clause. Once my son finishes homework, we will go shopping. Once my son finishes homework, we will go shopping. In the sentence, once my son finishes work, that is subordinate clause because that has no any meaning in its own. It is dependent with the full sentence. For this, that is subordinate clause. Okay, subordinate clause also has its three types. For example, that is noun clause, adjective clause, and adverb clause. But in this video, we are not talking about subordinate clause all forms. In this video, we are talking about principal clause and subordinate clause. We will talk about this topic in the next video. For this, you need to stay connected to watch the full video, and don't forget to subscribe my channel for get notified when I post the video. Let us see the examples. I knew that he wanted to go home. I knew that he wanted to go home. In the sentence, I knew, that is principal clause, and that he wanted to go home, that is subordinate clause, because that he wanted to go home, that has no meaning without I knew. For this, it is subordinate clause because subordinate clause has no meaning in its own. Number 2 example, he succeeded because he worked hard. He succeeded because he worked hard. In this sentence, he succeeded, that is principal clause because it has also a meaning in its own. But because he worked hard, that has no meaning. Next example, that is he was contented although he was poor. He was contented although he was poor. In the sentence, he was contented, that is principal clause, although he was poor, that is subordinate clause because although he was poor, it is not complete in sense. After that, the patient had died before the doctor came. The patient had died before the doctor came. In the sentence, the patient had died, that is principal clause or independent clause, and before the doctor came, that is subordinate clause or dependent clause because before the doctor came, that has no meaning in its own. Before finishing the video, let us see a quick recap about the topic. Principal clause is nothing but independent sentence that makes complete sense. A subordinate clause is also referred as a dependent clause, and it cannot stand alone as it doesn't express a complete meaning on its own. However, subordinate clause comprise a subject and a verb. So I think that video will really helpful for you. I think after watching this video, you can identify the principal clause and subordinate clause in the sentence. So I think that will not disappoint you. And keep watching for getting the second part of this video. And subscribe this channel for getting more these kinds of English learning videos every day.